Part 1. The Obsession. The World, for Barry Sanders, was a monochrome film until he saw Elizabeth Olsen on a late-night talk show. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. The corn silk hair, the wide, expressive eyes that seemed to hold galaxies of gentle intelligence. It was a quality of light. When she laughed, a soft, self-deprecating sound, the grainy image on Barry's second-hand laptop seemed to brighten, as if the screen itself couldn't contain her radiance. In that moment, something dormant in his 19-year-old soul cracked open, and a desperate, thorny vine began to grow. His life in the sleepy, rain-slicked town of Cedar Bend offered little competition for such a fixation. He lived in a small, perpetually dim apartment above a shuttered hardware store, the air thick with the ghosts of fried food and loneliness. His days were a cycle of community college classes he barely attended, and a part-time job stocking shelves at a grocery store, a job he performed with the listless automation of a ghost himself. But his nights belonged to Elizabeth. He didn't call it stalking, not even in the privacy of his own mind. To Barry it was devotion. It was research. He knew her filmography by heart, of course, but that was surface level. His true scholarship was in the digital breadcrumbs she left behind. He had maps of Los Angeles pinned to his wall, with locations circled in red Sharpie: the cafe she frequented in Silver Lake, the yoga studio in Topanga Canyon, the farmer's market she'd been photographed at. He knew the names of her friends, her dog, the brand of her skincare. He followed fan accounts and paparazzi feeds, his phone a constant, flickering shrine in his palm. His favorite possession was a single, tangible artifact, a promotional postcard for one of her indie films, Wind River. He'd ordered it online. It showed her, face smudged with dirt, looking out at a vast, snowy landscape with an expression of profound sorrow and resilience. He would trace the line of her jaw with his fingertip, feeling a connection that was, to him, as real as the pulse in his own wrist. "You understand," he'd think? "You understand what it's like to be alone in a cold place. Barry, you're living in a fantasy," his coworker Maya told him one evening as they clocked out. Maya was the closest thing he had to a friend, a sharp-witted art student with dyed black hair and a perpetual smear of paint on her clothes. "This is creepy. And illegal. And frankly, sad." "It's not a fantasy," Barry said, zipping his thin jacket against the chill. "It's a prelude. When we finally meet, I'll already know her. It'll be like reuniting with an old friend." Maya shook her head, her expression a mix of pity and frustration. "People like her, they have walls. They have security. You're not going to just bump into her at a coffee shop. And even if you did, what then? You think she's going to fall for the guy who knows her dog's favorite brand of organic treats?" "You don't get it," Barry muttered, looking away. Maya didn't understand the depth of his feeling, the certainty that hummed in his bones. He and Elizabeth were two stars in a cold universe, destined to collide. The catalyst came on a Tuesday. A gossip site posted a grainy, long-lens photo of Elizabeth looking tired, getting into a car. The headline was cruel: "Lizzie losing her sparkle?" Barry felt a white-hot bolt of protective anger. She was surrounded by vultures, by people who didn't see her light, only how they could profit from it. She was lonely, even in a crowd. He could see it in the slight slump of her shoulders. That was the moment the idea solidified, transforming from a daydream into a plan. He wasn't just going to follow her digital trail. He was going to go to her. He quit his job, withdrew his meager savings, and bought a one-way bus ticket to Los Angeles. When Maya found out, she showed up at the bus station, her face pale. "This is a mistake, Barry. A huge one. Please don't do this." "I have to," he said, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. It felt light, inconsequential. "She needs me, even if she doesn't know it yet." "And what about what you need?" Maya's voice cracked. "A real life? A friend?" He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in weeks. He saw the genuine concern in her eyes, and for a second his conviction wavered. But then he pictured Elizabeth's weary face in that photograph, and the wavering solidified into cold, hard resolve. "This is my real life," he said, and boarded the bus. Part 2. The City of Flickering Ghosts. Los Angeles was a sensory assault. The relentless sun was a stark contrast to Cedar Bend's perpetual drizzle. The sheer scale of it, the endless sprawl of concrete and palm trees, was overwhelming. But Barry had his map, both digital and physical. He found a cheap, grim motel room in North Hollywood that smelled of bleach and despair, and he began his pilgrimage. For 2 weeks, he haunted the places she was known to frequent. He sat for hours in the Silver Lake Cafe, nursing a single coffee, his heart hammering every time the door chimed. He hiked the trails near Topanga, his eyes scanning for a glimpse of blonde hair. He became a ghost in the City of Angels, a pale, silent boy fading into the background. And then, he saw her. It was at the farmer's market. She was there, in jeans and a simple t-shirt, a large woven bag over her shoulder, laughing with a friend. She was more beautiful in person, the light around her not a metaphor but a tangible aura. Barry stood frozen, 20 feet away, behind a stall selling heirloom tomatoes. The world narrowed to the space between them. The sounds of the market, the chatter, the music, the clinking of jars, muffled into a distant hum. This was it. The moment. But he couldn't move. The reality of her presence was a physical force, pinning him in place. He watched as she sampled a piece of cheese, as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, as she lived her life, utterly unaware of the cataclysm she was causing in his. The distance felt infinite. He was a spectator to a star, close enough to feel its heat but separated by the vacuum of space. He followed her at a distance, as she and her friend left the market and walked towards a tree-lined street of beautiful, secluded homes. He watched her unlock a gate and disappear inside a Spanish-style villa surrounded by a high wall. Her home. A new phase of his devotion began. The stalking became territorial, ritualistic. He learned her schedule. Mornings were for yoga or Pilates. Afternoons were often for script readings or meetings at a studio lot. Evenings she mostly stayed in. He would find a spot on the hill overlooking her property, hidden by a cluster of oleander bushes, and watch the lights go on and off in different rooms, imagining her life inside. It was on the third night of his vigil that he first saw the other one. He was in his usual spot, the damp earth seeping through the knees of his jeans, his binoculars trained on her bedroom window. The light was on, the sheer curtains drawn. A shadow moved across the window. Her shadow he assumed tall and slender. But then a second shadow separated from the first. It was darker, more solid somehow, and its movements were wrong. It didn't glide or walk. It jerked like a puppet on a string. It moved behind her shadow, and for a terrifying moment, they merged into one distorted, monstrous shape before separating again. Barry lowered the binoculars, his heart thudding against his ribs. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light, his tired mind playing games. When he looked again, there was only one shadow, moving normally now, before the light in the room went out. He dismissed it. Stress, lack of sleep. The intensity of his mission. But it happened again the next night. And the night after that, the second shadow was always there, a silent, malevolent twin to her own. It would loom over her, mimic her, sometimes even seem to reach for her throat before dissolving. Barry started to feel a cold dread that had nothing to do with his illicit activity. He wasn't just watching Elizabeth Olsen, he was watching something watch her. One evening, desperate and unnerved, he left his post on the hill and circled the wall around her property. He needed to get closer, to see if his eyes were deceiving him. The wall was high, but an old, gnarled oak tree in the neighboring vacant lot offered a branch that stretched over it. With a strength born of desperation, he hauled himself up. The view was better. He could see directly into her living room. She was there, curled on a sofa with a book, a soft blanket over her legs. She looked peaceful, bathed in the warm glow of a floor lamp. And standing directly behind the sofa, so still it was almost part of the furniture, was a man. Barry's blood ran cold. The man was tall, dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit. his hair slicked back from a pale, gaunt face. His eyes were dark hollows, and he was staring, unblinking, at the back of Elizabeth's head. He wasn't a physical intruder. Barry could sense that immediately. The air around him shimmered faintly, like heat haze on a road. A ghost. As Barry watched, frozen in the tree, the ghost slowly raised a hand and placed it on Elizabeth's shoulder. She shivered as if from a sudden chill and absently pulled her blanket tighter, never looking up from her book. The ghost's lips stretched into a smile that held no warmth, only a terrible, possessive satisfaction. Barry scrambled down from the tree, his hands scraped and bleeding, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It was real. She wasn't just lonely. She was haunted. She was in danger and no one else knew. His purpose, which had been murky and obsessive, now snapped into sharp, heroic focus. He wasn't a stalker. He was a protector. Her knight, summoned from the shadows to fight a ghost. Part 3. The Unwitting Guardian. His motel room became a war room. The maps on the wall were now annotated with symbols only he understood. He spent his days in libraries, scrolling through microfiche archives of old Los Angeles newspapers, and in used bookstores, hunting for texts on local history and the occult. He learned that Elizabeth's beautiful Spanish-style villa had been built in the 1920s. Its original owner was a reclusive, wealthy businessman named Alistair Hemlock. Hemlock had been a notorious figure, a man with a fascination for the occult and a possessive, violent streak. His young wife, Eleanor, had died under mysterious circumstances in the house in 1932, an official ruling of accidental fall. But the gossip columns of the time whispered of foul play, of Hemlock's jealous rages. Hemlock himself had been found dead in the study a year later, a supposed suicide. The house had a long, troubled history of short-term owners and strange occurrences before Elizabeth bought it, seeking a private sanctuary. Barry was sure the malevolent ghost was Alistair Hemlock. He was a parasite, feeding on Elizabeth's light, trying to possess what he could not have in life. The shadows Barry had seen were Hemlock's essence, trying to merge with hers, to snuff out her vitality and make her his eternal bride. His research became an obsession layered upon an obsession. He bought salt from a grocery store and cheap silver rings from a pawn shop, things the internet told him could ward off spirits. He felt a profound sense of destiny. This was why he had been drawn to her. Not for a romantic fantasy, but for a sacred duty. One night, armed with a bag of rock salt and a racing heart, he decided to act. He waited until he saw Elizabeth's car leave, a rare evening out, and Hemlock's ghostly form appear at the living room window, watching her go with palpable fury. This was his chance. He scaled the wall in a different, darker spot, dropping silently into the manicured garden. The house was silent, looming over him. He could feel a pressure in the air, a static charge of malevolence. He crept to the back door, expecting a sophisticated alarm system, but found the lock old and simple. A few tense moments with a lockpick set he'd bought online, and the door clicked open. The inside of her home was both surreal and intimately familiar. He knew the layout from paparazzi photos taken through windows. He knew the art on the walls, the style of the furniture. But being inside was different. It smelled of her, a faint, clean scent of jasmine and sandalwood. It felt like trespassing in a church. He moved through the dark kitchen into the living room. The oppressive feeling was strongest here. The air was cold. He could see his breath. He started pouring a line of salt across the thresholds, the doorway to the hall, the entrance to the study. He was halfway through the living room when a voice, dry as dust and crackling with static, spoke from the darkness behind him. "You dare?" Barry spun around. Alistair Hemlock stood in the center of the room, fully materialized. He was more terrifying up close. His face was a mask of aristocratic cruelty, his eyes now glowing with a faint red light. The room seemed to darken, the shadows stretching and twisting towards him. "She's not yours," Barry said, his voice trembling but defiant. He fumbled in his bag for a silver ring, holding it out like a weapon. Hemlock laughed, a sound like breaking bones. She resides in my house. She breathes my air. She is mine by right of domain. You are nothing, a gnat, a filthy little shadow dweller who thinks his paltry love gives him purpose. The ghost flickered and appeared inches from Barry's face. The cold radiating from him was intense, a deep, soul-numbing chill. I see you. I see the rot in your soul. You do not love her. You want to consume her just as I do. We are the same, you and I. We are nothing alike, Barry shouted, thrusting the silver ring forward. It passed through Hemlock's chest and the ghost shrieked, not in pain, but in outrage. He swiped a hand and an invisible force threw Barry across the room. He crashed into a bookshelf, sending books and trinkets clattering to the floor. You have defiled my home, Hemlock hissed, advancing. The shadows in the room coalesced, forming into long, tendril-like arms that slithered across the floor towards Barry. You will become a part of it. A permanent guest. Barry scrambled backward, his mind screaming. This was a mistake. He was going to die here, and Elizabeth would never know why. As the shadowy tendrils wrapped around his ankles, cold and solid as iron, the headlights of a car swept through the front window. Elizabeth was home. Hemlock's form flickered and dissolved into a wisp of black smoke that shot up towards the ceiling and vanished. The oppressive cold lifted, and the shadows retreated to their proper places. Barry, panting and terrified, struggled to his feet. He had to get out. He stumbled towards the back door just as he heard the key in the front lock. He made it out into the garden, over the wall, and into the night, his body bruised and his spirit shaken. But beneath the terror, a new, fierce emotion bloomed. Validation. He had faced the monster. He had seen it. And he had survived. Part 4. The Fractured Gaze. The break-in made the news, a small, sensational piece. Actress Elizabeth Olsen's home intruded. Nothing stolen. The article mentioned police found traces of salt on the floor, speculating it was some kind of ritualistic element. Barry watched the report on a TV in a diner, a cold knot in his stomach. He was a criminal in their eyes, but he was also the only one who knew the truth. He became more careful, but also more determined. He couldn't confront Hemlock inside the house again. He needed to find a way to break the ghost's connection to the property, or to Elizabeth. His research led him to a small, cluttered occult shop tucked away in a forgotten corner of Hollywood. The air inside smelled of sage and old paper. The proprietor was an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, her face a web of wrinkles, her eyes a disconcertingly sharp and clear blue. You're tangled up in something old and nasty, boy, she said before he'd even spoken a word. She was looking not at him, but at a space just over his left shoulder. Shaken, Barry told her everything, about Hemlock, the haunting, his own desperate attempts to help. He left out Elizabeth's name and his initial stalking, framing it as a concerned friend. Mrs. Gable listened, her expression grim. Alistair Hemlock, she mused. A bad piece of work. His spirit is a stain on that land. He doesn't just haunt the house. He's bound to it by his own hatred and possessiveness. And he's grown strong. Feeding on a vibrant soul like your friend has given him power he hasn't had in decades. How do I stop him? You can't stop a force like that, she said bluntly. You can only try to sever the ties. His anchor is in the house. Something that belonged to him. Something he poured his malice into. You find it and you destroy it. But boy, she fixed him with her piercing gaze, this kind of work. It requires a pure intention, a selfless heart. If there's any rot in your motive, any possessiveness of your own, it will not only fail, it will turn back on you. The shadow will see its own reflection and embrace it. Are your intentions pure? Barry thought of Elizabeth's smile, of the desperate need in his heart. Was it love? Was it salvation? Or was it, as Hemlock had hissed, just a different kind of hunger? They are, he said, the lie tasting like ash. Mrs. Gable sold him a small smooth river stone etched with runes. This is a ward. It will offer some protection, but it is not a weapon. The only weapon you have is your will. And your heart. Remember what I said. Back in his motel room, Barry held the stone. It was warm to the touch. He thought about Mrs. Gable's warning. The shadow will see its own reflection. He looked at the postcard of Elizabeth from Wind River, taped to his wall. Her sorrowful, resilient face. I am doing this for you, he thought, trying to burn away any impure thoughts. Only for you. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's life was changing. The break-in had shaken her. She started having vivid, terrible nightmares of the gaunt man in the suit standing over her bed. She felt a constant, watchful coldness in the house, a heaviness in the air that she'd previously attributed to the old building's quirks. She hired a security consultant, a no-nonsense man named David, who installed new cameras and a state-of-the-art alarm system. One afternoon, while David was explaining the system's features, Elizabeth's eyes drifted to the monitor showing the live feed from the camera on the back gate. For a fraction of a second, she saw a pale, young face peering from the oleander bushes on the hill. It was gone so fast she thought she'd imagined it, but a cold finger of dread traced its way down her spine. The intruder was still out there, watching. Barry, unaware he'd been seen, was finalizing his plan. Mrs. Gable's words about an anchor had given him a direction. He needed to get back inside the house and find the object tethering Hemlock to this world. With the new security, it was impossible. He would have to get in when she was home, when the system was disarmed. It was a terrifying prospect. He would have to reveal himself to her. The opportunity came on a night when a fierce storm lashed Los Angeles. The wind howled and rain fell in sheets. Perfect cover. He saw her return home alone, the security gate swinging shut behind her car. He waited, shivering in the downpour, until the lights in the living room went on. He knew the alarm would be disarmed now. This was it. Taking a deep breath, he approached the front gate and pressed the intercom button. Part 5. The Confession. The buzzer echoed in the serene interior of the villa. Elizabeth, wrapped in a robe and sipping tea, jumped. No one ever came to the front gate unannounced. Wary, she went to the intercom panel and pressed the video button. The screen showed a drenched, pale young man, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked terrified. It was the face from the camera. Her heart hammered. She should call David, call the police. But something in his eyes, a desperate, wild plea, made her hesitate. Who is it? She asked, her voice tight. My name is Barry Sanders, he said, his voice crackling through the speaker. Please, you have to let me in. You're in danger. It's not me, I swear. It's the house. It's haunted by a man named Alistair Hemlock. The name landed like a physical blow. She had done her own research on the house's history. She knew the name. She'd seen the old photographs. The gaunt man from her nightmares. A cold dread, deeper than any fear of a living stalker, seized her. How do you know that name? She whispered. I've seen him. Barry's voice was frantic. I've been trying to protect you. Please, Elizabeth, you have to believe me. He's getting stronger. He wants to keep you here forever. It was madness. This was the intruder, the stalker, spouting delusional nonsense. And yet, it lined up with her nightmares, with the oppressive feeling, with the strange occurrences. The salt on the floor. Against every instinct of self-preservation, a morbid, terrifying curiosity won out. She needed to hear him. She needed to know. Her finger hovered over the button to open the gate. It was the biggest mistake of her life. Part 6. The Reflection. The front door opened and there she was. Elizabeth Olsen, in the flesh, standing in her foyer, her face a mask of fear and resolve. Barry stepped inside, water pooling at his feet on the beautiful tile. He was in her space, not as a ghost, but as a person. The reality of it was dizzying. Start talking, she said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. And if this is a trick, I have a panic button right here. She gestured to a small device on a table. And so, Barry confessed. He told her everything. Not in a sane, linear way, but in a torrent of desperate truth. He told her about Cedar Bend, about the talk show, about his devotion. He told her about the maps, the research, the watching. He saw the revulsion and horror dawn in her eyes, but he pressed on. He told her about the second shadow, the ghost in the suit, his own break-in, the confrontation, his research into Hemlock. his visit to Mrs. Gable. As he spoke, the house seemed to listen. The air grew colder. The lights flickered. Elizabeth listened, her initial fear curdling into a profound, soul-sickening terror. This boy was clearly unwell, his obsession a tangled, pathological thing. But the details? The details were too specific. The description of the ghost matched her nightmares perfectly. The name Alistair Hemlock was one she'd found in old property deeds. The salt? How could he know? "You need help," she said, her voice shaking. "You're sick. You've constructed this entire fantasy." "It's not a fantasy," he pleaded, taking a step forward. She flinched back, her hand moving towards the panic button. "He's here. Right now. Can't you feel him?" A floor lamp in the living room switched on by itself, then off, then on again. A book flew from a shelf and slammed against the far wall. Elizabeth gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes were wide with primal fear. It was real. All of it was real. "The anchor," Barry said, his voice low and urgent. "Mrs. Gable said we have to find the anchor, the thing that binds him here. It has to be something of his. Something personal." The temperature plummeted. Their breath misted in the air. From the darkness of the hallway, a figure emerged. Alistair Hemlock, fully formed, his eyes burning with red embers. He was more solid than Barry had ever seen him. The storm outside raged, mirroring the tempest within. "You brought the vermin into my parlor." Hemlock's voice echoed, not through the air, but inside their minds. "You defile my home with your presence, boy. And you, my dear Eleanor, you entertain him." "My name is Elizabeth," she whispered, her body trembling. "You are what I say you are," Hemlock snarled. He raised a hand, and the shadows in the room came alive, swirling around Barry, holding him fast. Barry struggled, but they were like iron bands. "The anchor," Barry yelled to Elizabeth. "Look for it!" "The study. It has to be in the study." Hemlock's attention snapped to Barry. "You think you love her? You think your pathetic crawling infatuation is love? I will show you what true possession is." He advanced on Barry, the shadows tightening their grip. Barry gasped for air. He fumbled in his pocket, his fingers closing around the runestone Mrs. Gable had given him. He pulled it out, and it flared with a soft white light. Hemlock hissed and recoiled slightly, but the shadows only tightened. "A petty charm," the ghost spat. "It cannot protect a heart as blackened as yours. Look at yourself. You are a shadow just like me. You watch. You covet. You wish to own what you cannot have." "We are brothers in darkness. No!" Barry cried. But Hemlock's words wormed their way into his soul. Was he any better? He had invaded her privacy, her life, her home. He had come here tonight not just to save her, but to be the hero in her eyes, to finally have her gratitude, her attention. His love was tainted, a poisoned well. As this realization broke over him, the runestone in his hand flickered and dimmed. His will, the purity of his intention, was crumbling. Elizabeth, seeing Barry immobilized, acted on an instinct of pure survival. She ran towards the study, Hemlock's old study, a room she rarely used because it always felt so cold. She threw open the doors. The room was dominated by a large, heavy oak desk. She yanked open drawers, her hands shaking, throwing papers and old pens onto the floor. Nothing. Hemlock turned from Barry, his fury redirecting. "Stay out of my things," he roared. A powerful force threw Elizabeth backward. She hit the wall with a sickening thud and slid to the floor. Dazed, Barry saw her fall. A new, clean emotion surged through him. Not possessive love, but a desperate, selfless need to see her safe. It didn't matter if she ever knew his name. It didn't matter if she hated him. She had to live. With a roar of effort, he focused all of his will, this new, purified will, into the stone. It blazed like a star in his hand. The shadows binding him shrieked and dissolved. He broke free and lunged towards the study. Hemlock was standing over Elizabeth, his form beginning to merge with hers. She was convulsing, her eyes rolling back in her head, a faint black smoke leaking from her lips. "Get away from her," Barry screamed. He threw the runestone. It wasn't a weapon, but as a vessel of pure, selfless intention, it was the only thing that could work. It flew through Hemlock's form and struck the large, ornate mirror hanging over the fireplace. The mirror didn't crack. It shattered, exploding outward in a shower of glass and blinding white light. A deafening, silent scream filled the house, the sound of a soul being violently unmoored. Hemlock's form distorted, stretched, and was pulled, screaming, into the broken fragments of the mirror before the light vanished. The silence that followed was absolute. The storm outside had stopped. The oppressive cold was gone. The house was just a house. Barry rushed to Elizabeth's side. She was unconscious but breathing. A small cut on her forehead bled from where a piece of flying glass had nicked her. He gently brushed her hair back from her face, his touch, for the first time, devoid of any desire but for her well-being. Then, he heard the sirens. She must have hit the panic button when she fell. He knew what he had to do. He stood up, looking down at her one last time. She was safe. The monster was gone. His work was done. He walked out the front door just as the police cars screeched to a halt, their red and blue lights painting the wet street in frantic colors. He didn't run. He simply stood there, his hands raised, as officers swarmed him, forcing him to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back. As they pushed him into the back of a squad car, he looked back at the house. In an upstairs window, he saw a flicker. Not Hemlock. It was a new shadow, pale and faint. It was his own. A piece of his soul, his obsession, his tainted love, had been severed in the final confrontation and had remained behind. A lonely, harmless ghost, forever bound to the woman he had saved, forever watching from the edges of her life. A silent, sad testament to a love that was both monstrous and pure. Elizabeth woke up in the hospital. The police told her they had captured the stalker, Barry Sanders. They found his motel room, the maps, the postcard. The story was clear: a delusional, obsessed young man who had fabricated a ghost story to get close to her. She was safe. The house felt different, lighter. The nightmares stopped. She tried to forget the entire horrifying ordeal. But sometimes late at night, when she was reading in her living room, she would catch a movement out of the corner of her eye. She would look up, and for a fleeting second, she would see a pale, young, sorrowful face reflected in the dark glass of the window, looking in not with menace, but with a deep, abiding sadness. And she would feel a strange, inexplicable pang of loss for a boy she never knew, and a love that had saved her in a way she would never understand.